Hello and welcome. This is Social Studies, Voices Across America. I'm Bill Wood.
And I'm Peter Goldsmith.
Are you still Peter Goldsmith, Peter?
I have been Peter Goldsmith for some weeks now, Bill, and I feel pretty good about it.
Even after a 2-hour run this morning, you're still Peter.
I did. Actually, I broke the world speed record this morning. I ran my usual 2 hour and 3 minute run in 1 hour and 59 minutes.
All right.
So I can't stand up, but I did break the record.
You had to crawl to the car, but you...
Absolutely. Had to be dragged and placed in my car, but I did break the record by 4.5 minutes.
Today is a different look at the Memorial Day weekend celebration just completed. We hope you observe the day for more than the unofficial start of summer and the cookout season. We hope that you took some time at least to remember America's military men and women who defend our national interests.
That's absolutely correct, Bill. You know, and I was watching a baseball game last night, and the guy briefly mentioned, one of the announcers, what a heroic play, or these guys are heroes or something. And then he stopped himself and he said, no, the real heroes are the people who put their lives in harm's way so that we can live the life that we live. And never should a second go by that we don't respect and honor those folks who have laid their lives down, or their bodies down, or their minds down, or whatever it happens to be, so that you and I can have a podcast and we can do the things that we do.
Our minds in particular, so many, we've talked in the past about PTSD, and hopefully we'll have a show on that in the coming weeks. But we tend to think about people who gave up their life, but people also gave up their minds. That was, I don't know if you just threw that out there, but that really resonated with me, that people don't think the same way that they did when they went into war. And these are young people. In fact, there's some stats that I collected here that mentioned that in World War II, as many as 20 million people, their births were denied because those young men were sent to war and were killed. And these were children who all over the world don't exist because of World War II.
Yeah, you know, Bill, conceptually, there are things that we have in our society, and we had a phrase a couple of years ago. It pertained to the large financial institutions, and that was too big to fail. Okay, it's too big to fail. GM can't fail, Chrysler can't fail, Bank of America can't fail, and so forth and so on and so on. And we have another one of those, which is equally as important. War can't fail. It's too big a part of who we are. It's in human nature to have war. Now, I had a statistic which I gave to you, which was, I gave it to you incorrectly. I used the word war instead of conflict. And I'll give you a definition of war, which I have. But since the birth of Christ, we've had 1 week of no conflict or war on the planet Earth. 1 week. We've had, I think I wrote the number down as 188,000 weeks. I have it somewhere, but it's ridiculous. And I think it's time that we began to think about how can we possibly do away with war. And on the surface, think, forget it. It's crazy. We'll always have war. We have this, we have that, we have this, we have that. Okay? It's crazy right now, but if someone doesn't think of it, and someone doesn't bring it up, and someone doesn't work toward it, it will never happen. And maybe if two old guys like you and me bring it up among thousands of other people and organizations, which we'll talk about as we go further, bring it up and talk about it, maybe our grandchildren's grandchildren will live in a world without war. I know we won't, but why can't they in 100 years from now?
If we're going to talk about war or conflict or troubled times, we have to understand what our starting spot is, where we're coming from, what our frame of reference, to coin a phrase from the culture. But war is defined as an active conflict that has claimed more than 1,000 lives of the past 3,400 years. That goes back beyond when Christ was born. What I have is that humans have been entirely at peace for just 268 of those years, or 8% of recorded history. So that's different than the 8 days, but that might depend on what your definition of
right,
definition of is.
Right. What I gave you was the definition of war plus conflict, and then but here's I have the exact same statistic with a sentence to add to it. At least 108 million people were killed in wars in the 20th century alone.
Yeah, I have that as well.
So you have something here that is ingrained in our nature, yet everyone's against it. I don't know anyone except maybe the large ammunitions companies and builders of weapons who are pro-war. Nobody. But yet we still have it all the time. And if we're not involved in it in this country, we're always on the periphery threatening to get involved in one of them.
And the great line that we used to use in the 60s is how war would be different if the old white guys who are the politicians, if they went to war and going in behind a closed door and sending the best of our next generation, send them off to be murdered, slaughtered, physically, emotionally, mentally, however they are going to be killed, because war has no, conflict has no respect of person. And it's even, there's maybe another level. We've talked about briefly here war and conflict. There might be another level with terrorism and how war maybe a lot of people want to say that the Russian involvement in our 2016 election was an act of war. They invaded our political space, which in the past has been a part of a definition of war. But no shots were fired. No people died per se. There was no bloodshed. But you could say, some people are arguing, and maybe I agree, that maybe this is an act of war and conflict.
Yeah, it very well may be, Bill. And I think what we're learning now in the 21st century is definitions are fluid. Things which were set in stone 50 years ago are no longer thus. So how we describe things is how we act about things. If we call it a war, it conjures up a certain picture. If we call it a confrontation, it conjures up another picture. Yeah. If we call it cyber terrorism, there's another. We have a very convenient word now, white collar crime. Yeah. Again, to quote my sainted mother, bunk. Crime is crime is crime. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a collar, which is white, red, blue, or green. It's crime. But we need to put a tag on it so that we can relate to it. What I'm saying is, let's take the tag off. You know, Mel Brooks had a very funny bit. I just thought of it this second. It's, you know, the old song for the First World, when Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. Okay. Mel Brooks did that, and he put in his own funny but tragic words. When Johnny comes marching home again, he won't have a leg, hurrah, he won't have an arm. You know, so all these patriotic pans to war and to murder and killing are just that. They're not real. You know, when you see a service person come home with one leg or one arm, or God forbid, worse than that, that's what war does. And what does that do to his family? And what does that do to his children and his nephews and nieces, or her nephews and her, whatever?
And the preceding generations of the family, not just the current, but the preceding generations, how they survive, whether or not there is going to be a preceding generation to Joe Smith's family if Joe Smith's not there.
Right. And how we now start to redefine this stuff. How do we come up with answers? You know, I have, as you know, I have several friends in Israel, and their voice is not very popular, but what they're saying is, look, if we could stop the war which is an internecine war and always has been, why not give the Palestinians part of Jerusalem? If that would stop all this murder and mayhem, is that such a terrible thing? Now, I know the other side of that is not 1 inch, and I know the Palestinian side is drive them into the sea, and they're both crazy. At some point, we've got to start realizing there has to be better ways to figure out nonviolent solutions to these questions. And we can't do it today or tomorrow, but I think if we go along the path and we look at organizations such as the UN, which is sometimes okay and most times not, because it's not well defined enough.
I agree with you generally, but we don't know how many safety valves exist to release some of the pressure. Maybe the argument in the General Assembly allow some of the pressure to be released from Venezuela, from Bosnia, Herzegovina, when that war was going on. Just all the places where people could sit and talk and blather on, and not in the old days, they would just get behind, forget him, we're going to war, and that's it. And that's where it tumbles off into bloodshed.
Yeah, and there are other things which bring about war. You know, I read an article in the New York Times during the Bosnia-Herzegovina war, and the writer, I forget who it was, but certainly it's researchable, said, if all these people were whales, we would have stopped the war a long time ago because we're protecting the whales. But because there's some foreign people, quote unquote, to us in the United States, oh, well, let them go. Okay? So this the irony of that alone is absurd. But there's another cause for war, which I've been reading about lately when we started to research this, and that is climate change.
Mm-hmm.
With what's going on in Africa now, with the terrible droughts and the cessation of feeding people and things of that nature, conflict is breaking out. Droughts are already making conflict more likely. As the world gets hotter, mayhem will spread, especially on the African continent. I'm reading that. That's not me. It's a quote. It's a piece I picked up from an article.
Yeah.
We don't think about that, but that's what's going on.
It is happening to a degree already in Bangladesh. They don't have an economy that would support military action, but people are leaving because there's not enough land is disappearing. The ocean is creeping up and taking away the borders. The droughts are taking away the ability to grow food. There's some who would even argue, and this leads up to what I want to say, is there a genetic reason why we fight? Some have said that the war in Syria, I've heard it said that that was part of a way of thinning the herd so that the Syrian government didn't have to pay for all those people to eat, to have a place to live, to services. You could certainly argue that some of the Mariel boat lift was releasing people that Cuba didn't want in the country and go to America, but don't go here. You don't stay here. Is there a genetic reason why we fight? There's no single war gene. This is part of the research that we did. You probably read the same article. Combinations of genes can predispose a person to violence. However, aggression is a product of biology and environment. In America, sources of aggressive dispositions include domestic violence, the portrayal of violence in the media, threats of enemies, and combat training. Whatever you blame the media for anything, I find that very difficult to stomach, being a person in the media for all of my adult life. I find it it's very easy to blame the media. That's part of them. It's their fault and not mine.
Yeah, but also, Bill, I think what's happened now is, we're not only reporting in the media, we're speculating in the media with no foundation. When you and I were in the newsroom,
there's no way to draw the line between speculation and reporting.
yeah,
People say that speculators or commentators are reporting news instead of opinion.
Yeah, in other words, well, I heard, so forth and so on. When we were in the newsroom back in the dark ages, you and I, the point was, that's good that you heard that. Have you at least 2 backup sources?
Yeah, right.
Because if you don't, you're not going on the air with that. And today, with all this blogging going on, a lot of it terrific and a lot of it important, there's also a lapse in what are your sources. Well, I can't give you my sources, First Amendment. Well, then I can't put them on the air because I don't, I remember I did a television show back many years ago, which was called The Morton Downey Show. And I remember we were doing a political show one night, and Mort came in and he had heard something. He was 3 sheets to the wind, or at least 2.5 sheets to the wind. He had heard something in a bar. I'm not going to repeat what it was. And he said, well, we got to go in with this. We got to start with this on the show. And I said, well, great. What's the background of this? Do we have sources? Can we verify this? Well, I heard 2 guys. I was in Morton's Steakhouse. These 2 guys were talking. I said, wait a minute. Who are these 2 guys? Never mind. I said, well, Mort, we can't go on the air with that. There's okay, fine. Well, of course, we start the show, and the first thing he says was, well, I have it on. and it wasn't a news show, and it was funny, and we all got angry, and so on and so on. But the point being, a lot of this stuff is silly speculation, which leads to and grows geometrically and comes to the point where we're all at each other's throats. Well, he said, and she said, and they did, and I did, and we don't listen. You and I have talked about it 100 times. We don't listen anymore. He's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. No, he's a conservative and he's a liberal. Wait a minute. If you do that, you're shutting everything off. It's the same question of war. If we don't solve a conflict with a peaceful resolution, then people are going to die. It's just that simple. And, in the old days, we went from, I guess, the cavemen, I don't know if they had bow and arrows. They had a spear and a rock, I guess, right? And then we went further and further and further. Then we had, and now we have a thing where a guy sits in Arizona and pushes a button and a drone blows up a building in Pakistan. Okay? That's the nature of the beast, whether you like it or you don't, or, it's fact. We know that. The government admits to that. Okay? Wrong or right, I'm not saying that. What's the next thing? Are we going to integrate other people's minds? Are we going to use mind? What are we going to do as opposed to channeling our energy the other way, saying, how can we prevent or at least minimize some of this conflict? I think, a hero of all of us, Nelson Mandela, unjustly jailed for 26 years, comes out and says, I want a revolution without violence. I want to set up the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, which has people coming, both white Afrikaners and native black people and so forth. And I don't know if any bloodshed was shed. I don't know if it was or it wasn't. But from what I heard, it wasn't. So even if it were, it was extremely minimal.
And what we're asking here, without going into a political discussion, what we're asking here is for the media to carry a different yardstick, be measured by a different yardstick than the White House. If the president says things that are not right, I heard or I was told or somebody is saying, then shouldn't he be held to the same standard as the media? But that's another argument altogether. And since
it is another argument altogether, Bill, but, and this is really going far afield because, that's what I really enjoy doing, is the Karmapa Lama, who's a remarkable, I don't know if he's human, I think he's probably human plus. And, he's next to the Dalai Lama, he's probably the most senior person in Buddhism. Not being a Buddhist, not knowing a heck of a lot about it, I could be wrong, but I'm close to right, at least for our purposes. He wrote a book. He's an interesting guy because he's been a Lama since he's been He was recognized as the Karmapa since he's 3 or 4 years old, and he's been taken in monasteries and so forth and so on, and trained and all these things. But today he's in his early 30s. So he knows about Facebook and Twitter and all these things. And he's written a book, I think it's called Interconnected. I read it, and that's pretty close to the title. It's a phenomenal book because what he's saying is everything we do is interconnected. And if we think about it in those terms, you know, if I punch you in the nose and you punch me in the nose and your brother punches my sister in the nose, my sister punches your mother in the nose, and your mother punches my grandma, and so on and so on. So all these things grow. Whether we're against climate change, we don't want to admit that it's happening. Well, that's fostering problems too. Whether we want to have CEO salaries that are 1,000 times more than the working man, that's fostering problems too. Whether we want to have a minimum wage of $7 when you can work a 40-hour week and take home $200, when there's no place in the United States of America where someone making minimum wage and working a 50-hour week can rent a 2-bedroom apartment, that's causing it as well. That's part of the cause. You know, it's not all this grandiose stuff. In the old days, like Genghis Khan, I want to rule all of so forth and so on. We don't rule that anymore. We don't rule anything anymore. We have a war. 30 years later, we've killed 1 million people and we're best friends. Okay? So, well, we are. Look, we had a huge war with Germany. We had a huge war with Japan. Okay? Japan and Germany are 2 of our allies. Right? I don't know if they are right now. I don't know what the White House is doing or isn't doing. But basically, they're strong allies of ours.
Our war, you know, we're selling tours to Hanoi and
right,
and so forth, where, you know, nearly a generation, a significant part of a generation of young men were killed or maimed or rendered brain dead.
Or killed and maimed and rendered brain dead. You know, in the war in Iraq, it's like, well, we lost 25,000 Americans. Yeah, but we lost over 600,000 Iraqis. They have mothers and fathers and daughters and sons and sisters and brothers and lovers the same way we do. And we've got to start thinking this way, you know, because 10% of the government is crazy and wants to make war. The other 90% of us don't. And I believe that's true in every country. Are there bad, crazy nutcases? Sure there are. There are. But in general, we can override that stuff. You know, the Taliban, all these people, I don't agree with anything they say, probably. I don't know all they say. But they've got a point to discuss. The way they carry it out, the way they act, to me, is atrocious. Boko Haram, these people are just the worst. But we've got to begin somewhere. Somebody's got to sit down and say, it doesn't work anymore. We've done a darn good job with nuclear weapons. To my knowledge, the only country in the world that's ever used an atomic or nuclear weapon today, and please God, let it be for a long time more, is the United States of America. So we've done pretty well. We've done pretty well, so it can be done. But I think you need to go further than that, and I think you need to put some teeth into agreements, and I think you need to somehow, I don't have all the answers, somehow figure out how not to make war. And one of the best ways, I think, is economically. Can we figure out an economic solution to a lot of this stuff so that people aren't killed? Can we go in as a collective, as the first world, as opposed to, I never heard what the second world was. I always hear about the first world and the third world. The second world is like, what is it, us who live in North Carolina here? Is that the second world? I don't know. But my point being, you know, we have a responsibility to do this stuff, and we do it. This country is great for that. It's wonderful for that. We've always been that. But I think it's time to really look at globally and how we make a small indentation into the process of war.
I think, you know, we can always, as we need to wrap up here, I think the one thing that everybody comes to mind is from Eisenhower beware of the military-industrial complex. As long as there are people who stand to benefit financially from war, from killing them, from making them the enemy and me the victim, as long as there's a financial benefit to that, it's probably always going to be war. So I don't know what the answer is. Certainly, honoring Memorial Day, another cookout, another Indy 500 race, all the things that happen on Memorial Weekend traditionally. As long as that is a diversion from the nuance of it's their fault, we have to do something to get rid of them. As long as that exists, there's probably always going to be war until we are evolved enough to understand that our contribution to the conflict is as much a part of the reason for the conflict as their contribution to the conflict. We're always going to have war. Even hear myself say that is disappointing, but we've got to be able to stand up and look at the man in the mirror, like Michael Jackson said, until we can look at the man in the mirror and say, are you doing everything you could do to avoid the conflict, to avoid the damage to the culture, the damage to the environment, the damage to the way the world spins? We've got a problem.
Yeah, we do. And, Bill, I know you'll put this up on the screen later because, I don't know how to put up this stuff on the screen, so you'll have to do it. There are two organizations. One of them is World Beyond War, which is a well thought out pacifist organization, obviously, that has free websites and free information and all this kind of stuff, which is wonderful to get a hold of. And we'll put that up at the end. And the other one is the American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker group, also very much about solving conflict nonviolently. And there are many others. But at least to start with those two, if people can just take a look and see, oh, maybe I can do this or maybe I can do that. Because maybe by doing one little thing, you might save one life. And I know in Judaism, saving a life is like saving the world. So, and I'm sure it's the same in many other religions and things, but I just know it from that. So it's important if we can stop one conflict and save one life or 10 lives or 1,000 lives, great. Why not?
Exactly. Why not? Can't have a better place to end. It's a noble effort to end war and not smack somebody in the face and knock them out, melt 100,000 of them to end war. Just find a way to not have the need for war that is as important as ending war. Till we see each other again, take care of each other and respect each other.
Peace.
You can get this podcast. You can tell someone else about this podcast. It's available through YouTube, through iTunes, and through Google Play. Let's hear from you. Let us know what you think so that we can be in community with you. And there is a way to contact us. That's at peter@agnetuslife.com or bill@agnetuslife.com. That's our email addresses. Let's hear from you. Let's open up the forum.